Heatwave Arena, or Hot Air Arena, whichever one you want to say, is only 2 weeks away from release, if not a week away, depends what time this video comes out, and we already have the reveal of a pretty powerful card, very reminiscent of a card that actually recently just rotated, that being Manaphy with its Water Veil ability. It says prevent all damage done to your benched Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. This card saw a lot of play during its legality, especially around the time of the Scarlet and Violet era, where we had, a lot of evolution decks in the format. It was played in Dragapult, Goldengo, Gardevoir, Charizard, pretty much anything that, played a lot of small basic Pokemon, because we obviously had other cards running around in the format like Radiant Greninja, which was extremely powerful but has since rotated. We also had stuff like Screamtail and Gardevoir, and most recently we had Kyurem from Shrouded Fable, which has now started seeing play inside of Slowking, and that deck has been doing decently well. However, that deck's power level might be coming to a halt with the release of Shaymin. This is an 80 HP basic Pokemon with the Flower Curtain ability. It says prevent all damage done to your benched Pokemon without a rule box by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. So already there is a pretty big difference. Manaphy just said prevent all damage done to your benched Pokemon by attacks. This says prevent all damage done to your Pokemon without a rule box. So immediately your EX Pokemon can still take damage, and any other rule box Pokemon can still take damage from bench hitting attacks. Another thing to note is that it does not stop damage counters, it only stops damage. So stuff like Dragapult can still place that 60 damage counters. Dusknoir can also hit through it because it places 13 damage counters, doesn't do 130 damage. So that's already like one thing, but I guess we have stuff like Rabsca, and this card is more trying to imitate Manaphy. But this card does have more downsides when compared to something like Manaphy. Main one being Manaphy was 70 HP and Shaymin is 80 HP. So you can't use something like Buddy Puffin to, immediately bench it onto the field and protect yourself. You instead have to use something else like Nest Ball or even Ultra Ball to search it out, which is a little bit annoying. Like, why couldn't they make it 70 HP? I guess they want to make it more balanced in a way, but at the same time, bench hitting Pokemon just aren't balanced to begin with. Like, Kyurem can just do 110 damage to 3 benched Pokemon, and with this in play, they can still do 110 damage to 3 benched Pokemon, but they have to be Rulebox Pokemon, and Terra Rulebox Pokemon, Terra EX Pokemon, already can't take damage while on the bench, because they have the Terra rule that says as long as this Pokemon is on the bench, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks, both yours and your opponent's. Again, that doesn't stop damage counters, but it does stop damage from attacks. So pretty much your only targets while this is on the bench is Pokemon with a rule box. And if those Pokemon are Terra Pokemon, then there's not really much you can target down. You could target down some, EX Pokemon that don't have that Terra rule, non-Terra EX Pokemon, which currently in the format we have quite a few, but that heavily depends on the deck. This card used in Dragapult is actually, pretty good because it means that they can't hit down your Dreepies and your Duskulls and your stuff like that. They can't hit down your Badoo, which is really good, but they can hit down stuff like Fezandipity EX and any other stuff you play. They can't hit down Dragapult because it can't take damage while on the bench. But damage counters are still a thing, so if you're up against the mirror match, this card is kind of dead. Gardevoir can still be hit through it, but they can't hit your Raltsers, your Munkidori, Screamtails and stuff like that for easy knockouts. Archlodon doesn't really care because it's really big and you can just pick it back up and put it back down. Raging Bolt, it's pretty useless in because you only play, rulebox Pokemon, so don't really want to see it playing that. See him playing like other kind of decks, like, inside of Slowking itself, because I'm mainly talking about, Kyurem being a threat. So if you play it inside of Slowking, if you're up against the mirror match, or you're up against something like Hops Zacian, or you're up against something like Gardevoir, then you're pretty protected. It also protects you from stuff like Zoroark, because they have Darmanitan, which does 90 damage and then 90 damage to a bench. So this card does have its uses currently in the format, but it's only against specific decks, which is kind of how Manaphy used to be, was that it was a good card, but it was only, useful protection against specific cards and specific decks, and it would kind of fall out of the format and then come back in and then fall out again and come back in. It heavily depends on the decks and what they're running and what they're able to do, because currently we don't really have that many, bench hitting Pokemon. Dragapult just completely goes through it. Stuff like, again, Hops Zacian can do 30 damage to the bench. Gardevoir plays Screamtail, which can do damage to the bench. Zoroark plays Darmanitan, and Slowking plays, you know, stuff like Kyurem and all that kind of stuff. And I believe in Hot Wave Arena, Heat Wave Arena, we haven't really had the announcement of any new cards that can hit the bench. So I imagine for the time being, the card might see a little bit of play depending on what decks want to play it. Again, like evolution decks, it's probably like really decent to play in. But if you're going up against like the top decks of the format, which are all like big basic EX smacky smack type of decks, it's not really useful. Again, like stuff like Slowking, like Zoroark, like Hops Zacian are not seeing the most amount of play. The decks seeing the most amount of play are Dragapult, Clefairy, Raging Bolt, Gholdengo, Archelon, and Charizard. And none of those decks really play bench sniping Pokemon, and the card doesn't stop you from getting hit by damage counters. Plus, even then you could just use something like Dusknoir to KO it, and then, you know, you can just do whatever you want after that because it's gone. The card does have its benefits, but it also does have some pretty bad downsides. Manaphy protected all of your Pokemon from damage. This only protects your Pokemon without a rule box, which I guess is fine because, again, as I said, Terra EX Pokemon can't be hit while on the bench anyway, but normal EX Pokemon can. And plus, we don't have other stuff like Radiance in the format or these in the format. It's just EXs as our rule box Pokemon. And again, another downside is that it's 80 HP, so you can't use something like Buddy Buddy Poffin to go into it. You have to use a Nest Ball or find a way to search it with something like Ultra Ball, so on and so forth. Is the card going to see play? Probably, considering that Manaphy saw a lot of play. At the moment though, we only have like 3 decks in the format that are like can hit the bench. So I imagine it depends on how the format shapes out. If we get more bench hitting Pokemon, then I imagine it'll become more prevalent inside of decks. It'll probably see play as like a one of, just in case you go up against that type of matchup, because then you're basically protected. Very much like how Manaphy was played. It was played as a one of, just in case you needed it, because even though those decks that can hit the bench were not like top tier, they were still around, so you might as well play it. So will it see play? Probably. I mean, it's a replacement for Manaphy, and currently we don't really have anything that's kind of a replacement for Manaphy. Rabsca, I guess, is, but you need to evolve it, and Jirachi only protects you from basic Pokemon that put damage counters down. So at the moment, all we have is Rabsca, and again, Rabsca's an evolution, but Shaymin is, you know, basic, and it also fulfills like the most annoying type of damage, because placing around damage counters is like, I guess, fine, because Dragapult can put them wherever it wants, so it can't just like immediately knock out the Pokemon, whereas, you know, stuff like En's Zoroark with Darmanitan can just knock it out because it does 90 damage. Slowking with Kyurem does 110 to 3 Pokemon. So yeah, will it see play? Probably. And if it doesn't see play, I imagine it will probably see play later on, depending on what decks we see in the format that can hit the bench. Because we know we had stuff like Radiant Greninja, which saw play in quite a few decks. It saw play in Palkia, it saw play in the Lost Box, because you could very easily fulfill its energy cost, and you could easily just get rid of 2 basic Pokemon if you're up against an evolution deck that heavily cripples them. We also have stuff like Wellspring Mask that can also hit the bench, and that's seeing a little bit of play in like Terra Box or whatever it was, and it saw a lot of playing Lugia back in the day. And I can't really think of much else to say about this card. I guess it's just a more balanced version of Manaphy. It does have a little bit more HP, so you can't easily get it into the field with stuff like Buddy Buddy Poffin. You have to use Nest Ball or search it out. And its protection is more for your, you know, non-rule box, non-EX Pokemon, which is the form of protection that you're mainly looking for, because those Pokemon are very frail, especially your basics that you want to evolve and all that type of stuff. And that's going to do it for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about Shaymin. Do you think this card will end up being the main replacement for Manaphy? Do you think this card will end up being the new bench protection up until it rotates? Do you think its restrictions make it a lot more balanced than Manaphy and all that kind of stuff? The fact that it has more HP, so it's, you know, a little bit harder to get out, and that it only protects your non-rule box Pokemon. Do you think those are a good idea? Do you think it's a little bit too restrictive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe, all of that nonsense, and I will see you in the next video, whatever that may be. Take care.